ilma darajat, and the ones who have been given knowledge. So the Islamic understanding is radically different from second wave, for example, understandings and liberal capitalist understanding. Why? Because the liberal capitalist and second wave understanding is that success is predicated or defined on how much, basically, money and power you have. This is, if I told you, close your eyes and draw for me a successful person. In fact, let's do this. Close your eyes. Yeah, everyone close your eyes. Now I want you to think of a successful person. Now open your eyes and look at one. No, I'm joking. I'm only joking. I was talking about the government in front. Yes. When we say, what did you have? Let's be honest here. Can we be honest? Can we have some feedback? When you close your eyes and I said, what's a successful person? The brother with the beanie hat. The good-looking brother, yes. No, sorry, the good-looking brother. You said Elon Musk. By the way, I was meant to speak to him when I went to California, but I had to leave. There's some secrets about him, He's trying to look for God and stuff. Well, yeah, he's trying to look for God. Yeah.
May Allah guide him. Say Ameen.
Anyway, Elon Musk. Give me some more feedback. Sister. Yeah, what's a successful person, in your opinion?
I've heard more.
But we don't know much about you, so. So what kind of characteristics, right?
For me, it's more about somebody who has kindness and love.
Okay, so you're talking on virtues.
Yeah.
Okay, that's an interesting, and lots of Hellenistic philosophers talked about that, virtue ethics. Yes, at the back.
What about Tony Robbins or Eckhart
Who?
Tolle? You know about Eckhart Tolle?
Who?
I know. Tony Robbins.
Sorry?
Tony Robbins?
The tall guy that's motivational
the
speaker.
tall guy that, yeah.
Yeah.
That lives in Boston.
I mean, looking at your hairstyle, it looks like you've been watching too much of this stuff. Getting excited, huh? I'm only joking. It's nice in this style. It's Canadian style, huh?
I literally ran here.
Anyway, what you don't think about, and I'm not saying that maybe this is like a micro, it's not really a cross-section of society, but it's interesting kind of feedback we got there. Look, when we think of success, sometimes we think of a rich person and we think of a powerful person. That's unfortunate. And who has put that idea of success in our minds? Well, this is Western propaganda, and especially like Hollywood and stuff. If you guys watch sitcoms, or you watch, I don't know, films, which I used to do 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Now I can't even remember, I don't even know what's going on. I was walking next to a celebrity the other day, I did not know who he was. The guy was like, you met him? I was like, yeah, who is he? Oh, his ex-person wife. I don't know. Sometimes I need someone to sit with me and tell me this person is famous and this person is important. But it's through this. Sometimes fame is another thing, right? So you think about fame as being a marker of success. But the truth is, these markers of success are based on liberal and feminist ideologies, because they've had a really lasting impact, especially since the 60s, in the case of second wave feminism. So the point is, our understanding is different. See, we don't think like that. We think that the most important thing is to increase knowledge. And by the way, history paints a different story. The people who leave the most lasting impact are those who have contributed most, who have learned and taught. If you really think about it, the most influential people in all of humankind, think about who they are. You probably think about Alexander the Great, maybe Aristotle, this person, that person. These people were learners and teachers, for the most part, of some kind of beneficial knowledge. So influence is not gained through power in the conventional capitalistic understanding of the word. And so for us to understand purpose of life, we have to kind of extract ourselves away from the Western ideals. So that's another thing. So a secondary way to answer the question in a nutshell is that we could say the purpose of life is to learn and to teach, and we have to prioritize knowledge. So for us, the pinnacle of important knowledge is knowledge of the Creator, because the more we know the Creator, the more we know ourselves. And vice versa, the more we don't know the Creator or forget the Creator, we forget ourselves, as the Quran says, right? Nasullah fa'ansahum anfusahum. That they forgot Allah, so we made them forget themselves. Because if you forget where you came from, and who you are and where you're going, then naturally you don't even know who you are fully. You don't know who you are. The third way of thinking about it is thinking about this world and asking the question, is this all that there is? Is this world all that there is? And there's no way that anyone can argue that really this world is all that there is. If you get the most ardent atheist in the world, he wouldn't even be able to prove on a philosophical level that we're not in the matrix right now. It's called the hard problem of solipsism. There's no way anyone can disprove this point that we're actually dreaming. This is all a dream right now. So the idea of the afterlife is not susceptible to some kind of falsification or observation. But when we think about this world, and we think about reality, we start realizing that, we start asking the question, is this all that there is? When we die, isn't there going to be something else? And these are very legitimate questions. Very legitimate questions. And the Islamic tradition has a very interesting take on this. Like, for example, when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he says that this world, in terms of the hereafter, is like if one of you goes to the sea and puts your finger into the sea and see what comes out of it. فَلْيَنْظُرْ بِمَا يَرْجَعُ. So let him see what comes out of his finger. In other words, the insignificance of this world in comparison to the hereafter is nothing from an Islamic perspective. So there must be a critical examination of this question of the afterlife, which goes beyond scientism and this skeptical attitude that, well, we haven't seen it, therefore we don't believe it. Actually, logically, it makes sense for there to be an afterlife. Though you can't prove it on on a scientific level, which requires some kind of falsification, you can logically understand why there would be a need for that, because there needs to be some kind of forum. If you believe in justice, there needs to be some kind of forum which sorts out the injustices. There needs to be some kind of forum that will sort out the injustices. And we call that the Day of Judgment. Yawm al-Din, literally where it comes from dain, which is debt. You're indebted and you have people indebted to you and you're indebted to other people in terms of justice. And so those debts need to be cleared in order for there to be justice or an actualization of actual justice. So we believe that logically the idea of an afterlife makes sense. An eternal perpetual reward is logically a just concept. Why not? Why wouldn't you have an eternal and acceptable reward for someone who's passed a test? This makes sense. If the understanding of human beings is that he's been given free will, and with that free will he decides to either know his Lord or know where he came from or so on, or not, then there must be some kind of reward for that. So that's why we believe in heaven and hell. So from that perspective, a third way of answering the question, what is the ultimate purpose of life, is to think about the reward, is to gain the eternal reward, to pass the test. The most important thing to remember though, in these three ways we've looked at, number one being to submit to the lawmaker, to learn and to teach and to act on that. And number three, to seek the reward, is that this is like a pyramidic hierarchy. At the top of it is to realize who you are and where you came from. And that means realizing, in our opinion, Tawheed, the monotheism. God's monotheism. God is one, and so on and so forth. So the purpose of life, I can answer in three questions, three different statements. One of them being is to submit to the will of the lawmaker, and the second one is to learn and to teach, and the third way is to seek the reward. And all of those three ways are contradictory. We have a purpose of life, and it makes sense of concepts like justice. If we didn't have a purpose of life, there wouldn't be an actualization of an ultimate justice. So when you think about the 6 pillars of Iman from the Islamic perspective, all of them aim to scaffold this understanding of the purpose of life. For example, we believe in Qadr, the predestination. We believe in the hereafter, and that we talked about the need for that. We believe in one God and so on. So all of that is meant to scaffold our understanding of the purpose of life. Now, I've spoken for a long time. I know you guys are tired. So I want to open it up, inshallah, for questions and answers. Are we going to have it written down, or is it going to be like... All right. Okay. So any questions? Yes, at the back.
So, in other religions, especially like Hinduism or Buddhism, the way to attain peace is through like meditation, right? So, and meditation itself is like a guide to peace, almost. It gives you like mental clarity. So, why isn't there anything like that in Islam, or is there with like Sufism?
Well, look, I mean, it depends on how you define meditation, right? Because we would say that the Prophet Muhammad had a meditative temperament. Like when he went to the cave, Ghar Hira, he was in effect meditating. But when we say meditating here, what are we talking about?
So meditating would be like literally more thought in your mind, or you let thoughts arise, just let them run in the background, and breathing technique. So you breathe, hold your breath, breathe.
All right. So look, obviously this comes from like Eastern traditions, this particular understanding, and then at the end of it you reach nirvana and so on and so forth. Yeah. Look, these are specific concepts which relate to an Eastern tradition. Obviously now, from our perspective, we have our own understanding of meditation. We do have some kind of like meditation, but it revolves around what I talked about in that hadith, which is called dhikrullah. Dhikrullah meaning the remembrance of God. So instead of having nothing in your mind, which is almost impossible to have, I mean, just try it. Try not to think about anything. I mean, you might as well go to sleep. You focus certain energy, right, into the names and the attributes of the one God, the Creator God. And that's what our understanding is of meditation. But it's not meditation in that Eastern sense. So it's our own understanding, which is based on the actions and we would say the prophets, because we believe in prophets that came beforehand, people like Abraham and Moses and Jesus, and they all came to preach there's only one God worthy of worship. And at the end of it, what they were doing was remembering God and telling people to do the same thing. So the highest form of cognition from an Islamic perspective is to think about God and his attributes and to ponder over that. Yeah, and so if someone does that to a high level, then they become higher. As we said, there's many ways of increasing in gradation in terms of success in the Islamic from the Islamic perspective. One of them is knowledge, one of them is action, and one of the main actions is remembrance of God. And by the way, this is equal for men and women. So there is an equality there. There's an equal opportunity for men and women to access the same kind of spiritual nourishment and worldly and dunyawi and ukhrawi, which means this life and the hereafter, success from that perspective. So that's how we would say this is a productive kind of meditation. As for not thinking of anything, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, I can try it myself. I might need to try it one day because I'm always thinking about things. But we don't think it's an act of worship necessarily, you see. But we have no problem in doing things which don't conflict with our tradition, you know? So this idea of having clear thoughts or something, that's not a problem for us.
Perfect, thank you.
No worries. That's my sister in the back, yeah?
I'm just wondering, why is there existence? Why is it necessary for us to exist? We know we're here, we know the purpose, but why is it?
I think that's a good question. So why do we exist? I would say, look, if we have a good understanding of who God is, right? From our tradition. Obviously, the question of proving God's existence is right now taken for granted. Like, I'm not going down that road, yeah? From first principles and whatever. I've written a book, you guys can read it, it's called Kalam Cosmological Arguments, yeah? So these are where the arguments for God's existence. Now, if we assume God's existence, and we know, and we also assume the prophethood of Prophet Muhammad, so we have to look at the characteristics of God, the attributes of God. One of his attributes is that he is Al-Khaliq, and the other one is Al-Khallaq. Ahsan al-Khaliqeen. That he's the best of creators. Now, why us? Why are we here? Is because this is an extension of God's most glorious, one of his most glorious attributes of creation, and we are the best creation. In other words, this idea that we're going to bring these sentient beings with free will and examine them in the world is the highest idea conceivable, considering the variables. That's why Allah is the best creator. So, does that make sense? So the reason why we're here is because Allah is who He is, and Allah is the best creator, and therefore, by extension, we are the best creation. We might not be able to gauge why or how that is, but that doesn't mean it's not true, because we can only see part of the creation. We're only exposed to some of that. Does that answer your question? Do you wanna come back and ask a question?
Like, why aren't we in heaven? Why are we on
Right,
earth?
because if we were in heaven, there'd be no point of our existence as free-willed human beings.
Like, there's no end goal.
The end goal is heaven for us, right?
Right.
Right. So us being free-willed, having the intuition of free will, yeah? And then passing a test, and then earning, if you like, heaven, which we believe, yeah, comes from God's grace, but also comes from our actions. Right? That is the best idea for a creation that could conceivably be drafted. That idea. Now, you might not understand how or why, but that is the best idea. It's the maximally perfect idea for a creation. And that is what God does. He extends His attributes, for example, the attribute of creation, into creation. So the creation is manifestation of His maximally perfect creative capacity. We are free-willed creatures, and that is an indicator of Allah's perfect creative capacity. Does that make sense?
But doesn't that limit God's attribute because we're going to end? So then does that mean that God
No, because Allah will continue creating. That's why Al-Khaliq is different from Al-Khalaq.
So, but like once everything's done and everything comes, we're in heaven, is God still creating things?
Yes.
But not the most perfect creation, right?
No, because the thing is, we would still be in heaven or hell, right?
Right.
So we were still going to be in existence.
Mhm.
So our existence, which now we've earned our place in heaven or hell, Allah might decide to do the same thing over and over again. Like, we don't know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to do, particularly. He might choose to create something, but we know that we are part of that perfect plan. We are part of that perfect plan. So in other words, why? Because Allah does the best things, because He's maximally perfect, and we are an extension of that. Yes, in the back.
So everyone has different faiths and different religions. Have to understand why we're here and God. How would you prove that your belief system is the correct method? That so you believe is true in what you believe. Because you believe that his belief, his understanding of God and destination is correct. So how do you know that you're on the right path?
Okay, so the question is, how do I know I'm on the right path? In other words, this is a question now which requires somewhat of an answer, right? So I'm going to tell you from the beginning. To argue from first principles, I'll say, look, you need to announce something. Oh, okay. He's standing there with the microphone. I think this guy wants to join in and ask a question.
I will interject at times because there's a lot of anonymous questions.
Okay.
Some of these questions are overlapping.
All right, no problem. So how do we know? Number one, how do we know there's a God? That has to be first answered, yeah? Demonstratively, what are the options? Either we came from nothing, yeah? Either we came from nothing, either we self-created and the universe self-created, which is impossible because it would have to exist and not exist at the same time, or that the universe was always there, or that we were created by some designer, or some ability able to create. The only two options which are actually logically possible are options 3 and 4. Options 1 and 2 are not logically possible. It's impossible. They're impossible like a squared circle. So we couldn't have come from nothing. and the universe couldn't have created itself. Option 3 is that the universe was always there. But the question is the universe dependent or independent? If it's dependent, then what is it dependent on? There cannot be an infinite regress of dependent things. Therefore, there has to be one independent. Or you could say it's independent, in which case, really, you're given the attributes of what we would say belong to the independent God, to the universe. But then the universe, you can add and subtract from it. But it's impossible to add and subtract from God. Therefore, the universe could not be independent. Therefore, you need an independent which generates everything else. Therefore, that independent, we believe, we would say, is base definition of God. There cannot be two or more of those, like in Hinduism, for example. Because the Quran says, لَعَلَى بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. They would have tried to outstrip one another for power. You can't have two all-powerfuls. You can't have two independents. Because if you have two independents and two ultimate wills, nothing will happen. Like, for example, if you have a car and you have two drivers, can't have that. Because there will be chaos, la fasadata. Like we said, the universe would not exhibit these organizing features. Therefore, there has to be only one independent. So we ask now the question, what does this independent want from us? Because we exist and the independent exists. The one independent, what we call a samad, exists. Now already we've cancelled out Trinitarianism and by extension Christianity, because Christianity says that you've got the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, and all of them are, for example, all powerful. So we've already cancelled that out because we said you can't have more than one all powerful. We've already cancelled out atheism because they say they don't really know where we came from. They have a lack of belief in a deity. And we've cancelled out pantheisms and polytheisms, which include some interpretations, for example, of Hinduism and other interpretations of Sikhism, which talk about the guru being part of, for example, the water, God, like a drop is part of the water, the ocean. So of the 6 major world religions, the only ones that really stand left, just by looking at this process of elimination, are Islam and Judaism. Now, Islam is a continuation of Judaism. It doesn't reject the fact that Moses came with Torah, and doesn't reject the fact that Jesus came with Injil, with his own book, nor does it reject the prophets that came before. So Judaism has nothing to say about Islam because it came before it, whereas Islam has something to say about Judaism and Christianity. And the narrative is that all of those prophets that came beforehand came with the same message. So we don't disregard Judaism, just like we don't disregard all of Christianity. And we say that there is truth and falsehood in those religions. But eventually, now we have the final testament, if you like, which is the Quran. How do we prove that the Quran is the word of God? So we do so through many different means. I'll share with you a few of them. Number one is that we say this book has a challenge to try and find in it contradictions. لَوَجَدُ فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. The fact that the Quran even makes that challenge is something which is absent from all other books. It's absent from any other religious book. There's no challenge in any other religious book of falsification. Number two, there's an inimitability challenge. Yeah, so the Quran says, try and find contradictions in this book. If you look at the Bible, the Torah, the whatever you want, the Bhagavad Gita, the GGS, Guru Granth Sahib, all of those books, none of them have a method through which we can falsify the book. But the Quran gives you a falsification test, and that is through trying to find a contradiction within it. That's one. Number two, in terms of preservation, there's no doubt that the Islamic case for preservation is the only academically sound and viable case, if we consider all other religions of the ancient period, including Judaism and Christianity. So their books are not preserved, and our books are preserved. And even people that in the academic field will argue whether that is the case or not, but such argument is not even there when it comes to Christianity and Judaism. There is definitely omission, insertion, and interpolation in those books. Therefore, number one, there's no contradictions, and at least there is a challenge for people to find the contradiction. Number two, there's perfect preservation, which is what you'd expect for a scripture that claims to be from God. Number three, you have a series of things, like predictions of the future, for example, which could not be substantiated, or from a probabilistic perspective, would be difficult to understand, had it not been from an all-knowing source. Prophet Muhammad has predicted, for example, that Islam will spread to Egypt, to Yemen, to Jordan, to Palestine, to Jerusalem. اعدد ستا بين يدي الساعة موتي ثم فتح بيت المقدس. Count 6 things before the day of judgment, my death and then the conquest of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the crown jewel of the Roman Empire. It was overtaken within 20 or 30 years, 10 years after the Prophet's death. It was overtaken. Just like the Prophet Muhammad said. So he told us what was going to happen in the future. And there's a beautiful book that's written, that you can get from the IU website, called The Forbidden Prophecies. It's free of charge. It will go through some of those prophecies that the forbidden prophecies. You can get it free of charge, and you can see in it some of those predictions, which prove to you that from a probabilistic perspective, that Prophet Muhammad, you could conclude, of all people that tried to predict the future, he is the only one who, when made predictions which have, this is the book, it's called The Forbidden Prophecy, which have parameters like time, date, place, and so on, was consistently correct, never disproven in his prophecies. So this is something which for us validates, among many other things that I could talk about, but we don't have time, like the structural and linguistic miracles of the Quran and Islam's compatibility with science, and how that, although we have to temper that discussion, how science has a special place in the Islamic discourse, which it doesn't have in other religious discourses. So from those perspectives, when you collect all the evidence, on the totality of evidence, it makes sense. We can say we're basing our faith not only on internal drivers, like those I've mentioned in the talk, but also through a lot of evidence. Does that make sense? Yes, thank you very much. We'll talk after if you want as well. I'll give you some literature.
That was an excellent question. I'm going to interject real quickly. Before I get to some of the anonymous questions, there was a sister who had her hand up. Do you still like to ask? Okay, and there's a sister at the front as well. Do you still want to ask your question?
Yeah.
Okay, feel free.
So I think it's fair enough to most people in the world, they do believe in a God, they call it the conception of God, the all religions do, and common person, maybe not. Well, I guess in the Western world, with the fast-paced lifestyle, they don't see God or religion as necessary to survive and thrive, because it becomes like something. But I see Islam is basically 6 pillars and 6 pillars of belief, and 5 pillars of faith, at least we believe. But I feel from my personal experience, people who not just like Muslims who may be raised in a cultural environment, or maybe not have the most loving upbringing, but people that I know who may have left religion or just don't care, their main struggle or resentment is initially, I guess, to the existence of God or what our God is or not. But against the unity of God, there's a lot of people, there's God's law, and almost just dismissed. But how do you reconcile with the fact that people don't see certain aspects of God's law? So yeah, or just in addition to men and women, I mean, there's a lot of that. Except the right, but I think that's how it feels. State or whatnot, but like my question is, if God's law is permanent, it's divine, then why would there be so much chaos and misery and I don't use the word equality, but just unfairness in treatment of different people, especially men and women?
I think I've got it. Yeah, I've got it. So the question was, did everyone get the question?
No.
All right, so let me just quickly repeat what she said, because she's closer to me. I heard her. She said, she basically asked two questions in one, right? And I'm happy to answer both because I think they're both important. One of them relates to the problem of evil. So how comes there's so much misery in the world? If God exists, how comes there's so much misery and chaos in the world? Yeah. The second question was the question of equality between men and women. How can we reconcile between the fact that Islam is meant to be a religion which is completely just, and then you have these disparities between injunctions which relate to men and injunctions which relate to women. So I'll answer the first question first about the problem of evil. The problem of evil, there was in the Hellenistic time a person called Epicurus who made the following argument. He said, if God is omnipotent and he's all good, omnipotent means all powerful and he's all good, then doesn't that contradict the fact that there's evil in the world? We say that construction doesn't take into account God's wisdom. So God is omnipotent, yes. He is good, yes, but he's also wise. And a wise deity or entity does the right thing at the right time. So in other words, the chaos and misery that you see in the world is reconciled with God's wisdom because he knows what he's doing, when he's doing it, and why he's doing it. If we believe he's all-knowing, then he's going to premise his actions on his knowledge, right? So that's number one. Number two is the question of equality between men and women. Now, you wouldn't ask this question if it was 1940. And that's how I would put it, because the reason why you wouldn't ask this question is because conceptions of equality were completely different before second wave feminism really kicked off. And so our understanding of equality has now been monopolized, not by everyone, but by some people. And especially gender equality is almost synonymous with second wave conceptions of it. First thing, like I said before, second wave conceptions are actually outdated in the literature. So the second wave understanding of equality is not the same as the third wave understanding of feminism. For example, I was reading Bodies That Matter, written by Judith Butler. In that book, Judith Butler, who's a third wave feminist and a post-structuralist, she attacks the patriarchy. And it's either that or gender, I think it's actually gender troubles. She wrote in a book called Gender Troubles, she says that the idea of a patriarchy is problematic because the patriarchy assumes that there's this binary between men and women, number one, and she also accuses it of being inhospitable to like Oriental peoples. For example, like if we wanted to completely, there are lots of aberrations of the patriarchy. For example, the idea of the patriarchy is that aforetime men have been oppressing women. Basically, that's the idea. There's been oppression, systematic oppression of women by men. But then when you give an example of a black slave, black man who lived in the United States of America and who was owned by a white man and a white woman, couldn't argue that that black man was oppressing that white woman. So there are nuances which are ignored in the second wave discourse. They are completely ignored in the second wave discourse. Therefore, the idea of a patriarchy, for example, and I'm giving you one example, which is one of the pillars of second wave feminism, the patriarchy, has been shaken by third wave conceptions. So that's something which is very important to know. So equality must be based on some kind of objective morality. Second wave feminism does not give you that. Simone de Beauvoir, in her book, she wrote a book called The Second Sex. And she wrote in her first chapter called Biology, she admits candidly that there are differences between men and women, anatomical and biological differences. But she says, despite those differences, and she even mentions emotional difference, she says men are stronger than women. She says women are more emotional basically, she says women are more emotional than men. They cry more, they do this. And if I had said the things that Simone de Beauvoir said, people would be calling me a chauvinist, trust me. She was candid in her admission of differences between men and women. Her idea though was, despite those differences, there should be an absolute equality between men and women. Now the question I would ask her, if she was alive, but if you write her name on Google, you'll find that she was wearing a headscarf, I don't know why. She never had kids. And she was like one of the leading philosophical founding mothers of feminism, is that despite anatomical, biological, physiological, and emotional differences, there should be equality. But I say to you, why? Why should those physiological and psychological and biological differences not be accounted for when there is prescriptions for either men or women? For example, in the UK, I'm not sure about here, you can tell me, when a woman is pregnant, she has something called maternity leave, yeah? How long is it here?
12 to 18 months.
Huh?
12 to 18 months.
12 to 18 months. How long is paternity leave? Usually what?
4 months.
4 months. Okay, so it's less. Yeah? In England, it's 2 weeks, right? So I think I have to come to Canada. But the point is, right, that the law accounts for this. And I would argue, look, rightfully, why not? The woman has certain biological and differences, which mean that in this particular instance, there's provision that may be afforded to her that ought not to be afforded to the man. And it makes sense because it's a biological difference. And she has had to endure what he hasn't endured. So the idea of an absolute equality is not something we agree. However, we do agree with a general equality, and especially an equality with spiritual accessibility and accessibility to knowledge. In theory, we agree with that. Because the Prophet Muhammad said, "Innama an-nisā'u shaqā'iqu ar-rijāl," that men are equal to women. And he said that in the context of law. So in front of the law, usually they should be equal. However, there are exceptions to that. And as we've discussed, even in Western law, there are exceptions. So the idea of equality is turned on its head when you look at the presuppositions and the reasons why you're asking that question. The reason is because equality for you, or maybe not for you, but for a lot of people, is where a man and a woman have exactly the same life opportunities. We say that it doesn't make sense. And that's a baseless claim. And it's based on the idea that equality equals identicality. Or that different things should be treated different things should be treated the same. That premise, which Simone de Beauvoir and other feminists make very clear in their books, is an unsubstantiated premise from a moral objective perspective. Therefore, to take that and then to superimpose that understanding of justice and equality on an Islamic narrative is problematic. And another thing is this, and this is where I think the argument shuts down completely. And I've written a book called Fifth Way Feminism, which is coming out, yeah? Soon. It's been reviewed as well, peer reviewed. No, honestly, spend time, man. I'm lying.
You guys should be saying, MashaAllah.
We need this. If you want me to tell you something, right? Kimberly Crenshaw in the 1980s, she invented this idea of intersectionality. Now, intersectionality is that a woman is not just a woman, right? She's a woman, but she could be a black woman, she could be a homosexual woman, right? She has more than one marker of identification. So if a woman has more than one marker of identification, which one ought to be prioritized in the hierarchization? In other words, now, if I write, can I use the chalkboard? Go for it. Give me a chalk, right?
Bam, Canadian chalk.
Right. Can I have something to wipe the board? Actually, no, it's all right. It's okay. It's okay.
Right there. Right there.
All right. Were you guys back in the 1930s or something? We have interactive whiteboards in UK. All right. So let's say woman X, yeah? Say she's black. Yeah? And say she's gay. And say she is disabled. And say she's also Christian. Okay? And say she's from tribe A. Now, in this, what should we put first? What's the most important thing? Okay, hold on. Why are you guys answering? You have to ask Miss X. No, seriously. The idea is, the problem is, feminists have not asked women. And especially white women have not asked women of disability, religion, and ethnicity. My argument is this, is that in the hierarchization, when you talk about intersectional feminists, you're saying that, look, you've got all these markers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But by saying feminist, what you're doing is what? You're prioritizing which marker? Gender, right? But who gave you the right to do that? You need to be able to consult that. If you're predicating your system of ethics on choice and autonomy, if that woman ought to have her choice, what you need to do on a methodological level is go to the villages of Africa and ask the women, what is most important to you? You might be shocked and surprised that the woman might actually say tribe is more important to me than anything else. Right? But the thing is, we don't think like that. So when you say feminism, what you're doing is you're superimposing a new colonial narrative that the most important thing in analysis is gender. But who gave you the right to do that? When you haven't even consulted the subject or the sample subject, in this case, women. And if there is a consultation process, it will happen within Western elites, white Western elites. Yes, black people have been given somewhat of a voice after the 70s and 80s, black women, but the reality is, what happened to all the other nations of the world? And we're not just talking about university professors, like Kimberly Crenshaw, she was actually a lawyer, but whatever, like elites in the Western world who happen to be black. We're talking about blacks in Africa. We're talking about Muslim women in the Middle East and in Asia and in Indonesia. Those people have not been consulted in the construction of a particular morality. And what's happened is the hierarchization and the prioritization of identity markers has been something which the white woman, for the most part, has determined. Therefore, I would say, look, what if a woman decides that Christianity is the most important thing for her, yeah? I would say that that's her decision, that she can decide that, right? And a feminist, an intersectionist feminist would say, therefore, if that is the case, then Christian notions, or let's say Jewish notions of gender, entail differentiation on in certain prescriptive injunctions between men and women, then you've got to say on intersectional feminism that that should be afforded to her. Does that make sense?
Well, I heard a lot of things you're saying. I really did not want to touch on feminism, and I was not going to go there.
Okay. But I wanted to go there.
It's good that he did, actually. Because a lot of the questions, some of the other questions were related to that.
Good.
So, I guess I didn't even talk here, but God's law, I know like in Judaism, like God gave me a law. But like, God's law is permanent. It's something that was actually, but because a lot of my friends would ask me like, I believe in God, you know, and I of course I believe in Mohammed Hijab, and I believe in but I don't find God's law to be fair.
Yeah. So
human beings can make better, more just laws, and why would it not make more sense to change this law and have this law?
I get the question. So you're saying some people say God's laws are not just. Therefore, I'm saying, look, for example, if we're talking about equality, I want to bring the argument down into bullet points now, yeah? Number one, if we talk about equality, what conception are we using? A lot of people are using the second wave concept. What I'm saying to you is that even third wave and intersectional conceptions of feminism.
Yeah, but let's leave feminism.
No, let's not leave feminism, because this is very important, because that's the presupposition. If someone says that your laws are not fair, they're basing it on an ideological framework.
No, but you said you should ask the women, so yeah, like my definition of equality isn't we're all the same because we're not. Men and women are very different. But
good, but that's yours, right? But the point
that's
is.
Fact, that's science.
Yeah, all right.
Not just mine.
I agree.
Yeah, but I guess.
Yeah.
Like in a lot of majority countries, such as Arab, they would say, you know, like women don't have the freedom to choose.
Saudi Arabia is a country of 30 million people, and the Muslims are 1.8 billion,
yeah,
right?
But they use the references, the source of the law from.
Yeah. Look.
So how do you?
So we have, if we want to look, Saudi Arabian politics is Saudi Arabian politics. Now they have Nicki Minaj there. Do you get what I'm trying to say? I shouldn't even want to go actually. Do you get what I'm trying to say? So I don't know about that.
I guess the Westerners, the argument Western makes is that
Look, I understand what you're saying, but look,
I'm not trying to.
I get it. But what I'm trying to say to you is, look, you have to think about why you're asking the question. What I'm saying that every question has presuppositions. Presupposition, if someone says to you, oh, we can make better laws than God, like, well, I'm saying is let's deal with your proof and evidence. Let's deal with your proof and evidence. Feminist comes to me and says, my proof and evidence is, or my argument goes, we believe in anatomical and physiological differences, but despite those differences, we believe in equality, or absolute equality. I'll say based on what? And on that point alone, there's no proof for second wave conceptions. What I'm saying in addition is that third wave conceptions and intersectional conceptions contradict with second wave conceptions. So look, the point is, we're not going to sit here and wait for white women to decide on what is equality for the rest of the world. Do you get what I'm trying to say? Okay, we can talk about it. We can talk about it after. But you get what I'm trying to say? God's laws are. We would say that God's laws are all perfect because they come from an all-knowing source, whereas man-made laws are fallible because they come from fallible sources.
If I may interject real quick, it seems that, look, Brother Hijab, he's giving you details, contextual details that fit how people think today. But really what you're asking is, how do you convince people who have a flawed concept of God to obey God's laws? You have to start with their concept of God. If they believe in God, but they're saying that humans can come up with better laws, they don't believe in the correct concept of God. Right then and there. So this is a matter of dealing with something called moral ontology and epistemology. Their concept of God is fundamentally different from ours. For example, as a Muslim, I don't even need to study any new ideology, any new model of ethics that, say, some other human being comes up with in 50 years, because my moral foundations already presuppose that human beings are an insufficient basis for lawmaking. They're not perfect. Whereas my concept of God transcends time and place and is located in the perfection of Allah, his omniscience, his all-knowing nature, and the fact that he is the only one worthy and able to determine for us what is right and what is wrong. This eliminates any possibility and any scope of any kind of model of human ethics that contradicts Islam. So it doesn't matter if, in 20 years, you have this ethics based on transhumanism. Maybe people are going to start getting augmentations. They're going to get robotic arms. People are going to want equality for them. For us, we're still going to refer back to the fiqh, because our basis is rooted in our creed, where we believe in Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when you deal with these people, you have to first start with that foundation. Because if they don't believe in the same concept of God as you, if they're in their mind, they think that God is some kind of a limited being that we can negotiate with, then they've already started the conversation with a fundamentally flawed premise. At most, you can, as Brother Hijab has mentioned, show that human beings are going to have contradictory ideas too. And they're just going to be like, okay, then let's try a little bit harder. Let's try a little bit harder to find something better. But by going that route, they're still relying on human subjectivity. And that's never going to lead to the solution. Does that make sense?
Is that good? All right, thank you. Let's get some other sisters there. Yeah.
Kind of, I'd like to clarify something. The laws that you're speaking of, that I think people around you are disagreeing with, aren't necessarily the laws of God. They're what humans are interpreting them to be, and they're interpreting them according to their own interests, according to material interests. So the ideal laws of God, we believe that they are perfect, but when they're interpreted in materialistic views, they just get twisted and everyone just falls apart.
Thank you for that. Did you guys hear what she said?
No.
She made a good contribution. She was saying that a lot of it's to do with the interpretation of the law, the sacred law, and how people sometimes use that for their best interest. Yeah, sister, yeah?
So a question that's sort of related to our topic today. So you are what you do every day, and we live in a capitalist society where we're just cogs in a machine and we're just working every day for success and money because that's the machine we're stuck in. So how do we reconcile that with our purpose in life, worshiping Allah? How do we move closer to Allah knowing that we're stuck in this machine?
Well, that's a great question, and one that many philosophers have tried to grapple with, like Max Weber referred to as the iron cage, And he wrote a book called The Protestant Ethic, and he had a whole theory of how capitalism actually emerged in the first place. But the point is, that machine that you're talking about, or that iron cage, is a very difficult one to pry yourself out of if you don't have the tools, motivation, will to do so. And what we're saying today is we have to change our definitions of success. So moving away from money, power, and fame to knowledge, virtue, belief, and so on. If those things are what, for us, are success, then we would automatically want to do those things rather than those. But it's a difficult thing to pry yourself out. It's a difficult system to pull yourself away from. Yeah, does that help answer the question?
Okay, I'm gonna ask an anonymous question.
There's a man in the back. He's really, really,
Yeah?
like, you know, it looks like him.
Yeah?
Yeah,
Okay.
we have to.
Go for it.
Yes.
I'm gonna let it slide.
What's your name? Huh?
I,
Aaron. Okay. Yeah, hold the jacket. What are you gonna come fight?
So basically, my question is, since after the death of the Prophet, there's always been a feud between the same group of Muslims. For example, Muawiyah and Ali radiallahu
Are you
anhu.
Shia? Get him out of here! I want to kill him. Yeah.
Unfortunate, right?
Yeah.
Now, how do I talk with Ali? How do I talk with Muawiyah? Who was in the right and who was in the wrong? And how do we differentiate the two? Now, in the future, like even I see you on Speaker's Corner all the time. You and I won't say you, but two groups, they preach the same thing, they have the same ideology,
Yeah.
for some reason they can't get along.
Yeah.
So why is it that they never get along?
Yeah, okay, that's a fair question. I'll answer what you say. Look, I remember one time I used to be a teacher and I had a Somali student. Yeah, got Somalis in here. Yeah, that's it. Anta. Let me just come to you, right? Then you can come back. Look, I was actually sitting with one of them, and he was from Hargeisa, yeah. What, are you gonna boo? Are you gonna? What? No, I'm only joking. And then obviously you know that Hargeisa is part of Somalia, so-called Somaliland. Yeah, so-called, yeah. The white man called it that, right?
Yeah.
But he also called. Okay, I'm not gonna go there, right? But there was a part, you know, the whole idea of the. Let me tell you a funny story, actually. I'm not really funny. I had a professor one time when I was doing history, and he was like proper snobbish and stuff. And he was like, yes. And he's proper, because he's a Cambridge, like proper refined so-called, it's like, and the English and the Italians were fighting over the crumbs of Africa. I was like, sorry, what's the crumbs of Africa? He goes, yes, well, this the crumbs of Africa, yeah. I was like, what's the crumbs of Africa? He's Somalia. See, this is the colonial mentality. Look, they divided. 30, 40 years, 50 years, 100 years later, they're joking about it amongst themselves. You know, the partition, divide and conquer. The point is, when I was speaking to my Somali friend, he goes, Allah, he said this to me, he goes, I have a neighbor. He goes, my neighbor is from X tribe, I'm from XY tribe, yeah? Tribe A, let's say, yeah? And if he was in Somalia, this is exactly what he said to me, I will never forget it. He goes, if he was in Somalia, I would have killed him. That's what he said to me. He goes to me, if he was in Somalia, I would have killed him. I said, why? He goes, because we're, you know, it's this tribe and I'm this tribe. Allah, you're being serious? He goes, yeah, he would have, because it would have been either me or him. Something to that effect. And I thought to myself, this is the problem. This is a problem, and it's not, I mean, obviously the Europeans had this issue and it culminated in the World Wars, World War I, World War II, and it was the worst that the world has ever seen. But the Muslims also have this problem with asabiyya. The point is, we can be different and still get along. Now, the same thing applies with the Shia and Sunnah, yeah? This is how I'm coming to you, wait, come down. What I'm saying is that we can be different, yet get along, so we can create those bridges. Like for me, I've had lots of debates with Shiites, yeah? I fundamentally disagree with them on key issues of Aqidah, on issues to do with God. I believe that they have a flawed understanding of God. I believe that Ithna Ashariya Shia believe that the attributes of God, some of them, belong to the 12 Imams. That's my belief. I've read the books. No one can fool me. Obviously, the layman, I'm not going to put that on the layman. But I know what I've read from Al-Amili and from this person. I've read it all. Yeah, it's clear. It's black and white for me. So I've had discussions with Shiites on these matters. And I'll tell them what I believe, just like I'll tell a Christian or a Jew or an atheist. However, after all is said and done, what we're going to do? I mean, how are we going to act with one another? It's got to be a interactivity now, which is positive, where we're building bridges and we allow bygones to be bygones. That's my understanding. So for me, a Shiite for me, I would not make takfir of him if a lay person, which means I would not excommunicate him from Islam. Say salam, I'll say salam, say with each other, eat with each other, everything is fine. But the truth is, we do disagree. And those disagreements should be aired out. And I believe when that's done, there's even more positivity because the elephant is out of the room. If we do so with cordiality and integrity. Do you see what I'm trying to say? So my understanding is we can be. Yes, of course, yeah.
My question is not Sunni Shia. Forget about the Shia.
So what are you talking about?
I'm talking about Sunni and Sunni.
Okay, same thing with Sunni and Sunni.
For example, if there is...
Oh, by the way, Shia and Shia, right? Okay, fine, I'll answer that question. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, he said, who do you choose? It's a clash. Listen, and listen, good thing for a Shia to listen to, with due respect. Allah says in the Quran, he says, if they believe in what you guys believe in, then they are on the right path. Now, notice the Arabic is amantum bihi, what you guys believe in. The primary audience were the Sahaba. So for me, to follow the Quran, I would want to believe what the primary audience, the Sahaba, believed in. So for me, when the Prophet Muhammad says, خَيْرُ قَرْنِ ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ, the best generation is my generation, then the ones who come after them, and the ones who come after them. And the Quran says on many different occasions, رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُمْ وَرَضُوا عَنْهُ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُمْ, and so on and so forth, and so many different verses that Allah is pleased with the Sahaba, especially those who gave bay'ah تحت الشجرة, underneath the tree, which we know who they are. Surah Al-Fatih, we know who those people are. They are the Sahaba that accompanied the Prophets. The Prophet ﷺ in his wars, some of them died with him, they were with him, they were his best friends, some of them married his daughters, and he married their daughters. Those individuals are the ones I would want to follow. After the Prophets, I would want to follow those. And I would say to anyone who doesn't want to follow those, then look at the verse. فَإِنَّمَا هُمْ فِي شِقَاقٍ فَإِنْ آمَنُوا بِمِثْلِ مَا آمَنْتُمْ بِهِ فَقَدْ اهْتَدَوْا وَإِنْ تَوَلَّوْا فَإِنَّمَا هُمْ فِي شِقَاقٍ فَسَيَكْفِيكَهُمُ اللَّهُ. If they believe in what you guys believe, then you're on the right path. But if they go astray from that, i.e. the belief of the Sahaba, the companions of the Prophet, then they are in transgression. I would say to those who disbelieve in the fact that Aisha, the woman who was with the Prophet ﷺ in his house, recorded his life, and done all those things with him, that subhanAllah, the Quran even says you're not allowed to وَلَا تُنْكِحُ الْمُشْرِكَاتِ حَتَّى يُؤْمِنْ. Don't believe in don't marry the disbelievers until they believe. Some Shia say that Aisha is a disbeliever. So how could the Prophet marry a disbeliever? The Quran says you're not allowed to, except for a Jew and Christian, and she wasn't a Jew or a Christian. So the idea is, for someone to believe in those things, I would say they are prioritizing their madhab over the Quran and Sunnah. And for that reason, I would say, look, in a nutshell, what do I follow? I follow what Allah said, what the Sunnah is, and what the Sahaba do through the madhab. I'm a Hanbali, so I follow the Hanbali madhab. That's it. For me, that's case closed. I'm happy like that. I'm happy to deen Allah Yawm al-Qiyamah with that. And I'm very worried for those who claim to be Muslim and go away from those particular injunctions of the Quran and Sunnah, which are very clear cut. It might be. Does that answer your question? Oh, okay, no problem. Next thing.
Listen, bro, inshallah, if you feel that your question has not been treated, you can come down and talk to Brother Hijab more thoroughly, okay? I said, if you feel like your question hasn't been addressed fully, you're free to come down afterwards. I'm not claiming you're Shia. I'm not claiming you're Shia. But we do need to get to other questions, inshallah, okay?
I said, are you Shia? I didn't actually accuse him of being one.
Yeah.
Don't worry, come down.
We're gonna continue. We're gonna move this along. I see a number of hands. There's 1, 2, 3. I remember these hands come first. Before I get to these hands, I promise I will show you. I'm gonna ask an anonymous question, okay?
Yes, please, also.
So the anonymous question I have is, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala create a system of creating humans and putting them on earth to worship when He does not need worship? He could have done anything. Why this?
Well, the verse answers that question. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونِ مَا أُرِيدُ مِنْ رِزْقٍ وَلَا أُرِيدُ أَنْ يُطْعِمُونِ. Say again? وَمَا أُرِيدُ أَنْ يُطْعِمُونِ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that I have not created the jinn and the ins except for that they create, that they worship me, that I don't need any provision from them, and nor do I need them to feed me. In other words, to give me nourishment, sustenance, etc. So from that perspective, the reason is because there's two reasons I would give. Number one, going back to that question the sister asked, because it's the best creation possible. Yeah, and Allah is the best of creators. That's reason one. So it's an expression of His creative capacity. Number two is for our own benefit. For our own benefit. It benefits us to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are the two reasons. One relates to the human being, the other relates to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Excellent. Okay. I'm going to have that sister ask first, inshallah, then that brother, and then that sister, then that brother. Because she had her hand up for a while. So, sister, please.
Okay, so my question is, how can we dismiss Orthodox Christianity who that wear hijab, do not believe in the Trinity, and do make sujood on the same path to Allah as Judaism and Islam?
Okay, so how can we dismiss Orthodox Christianity that don't believe in the Trinity, the women wear hijab, and so on, right? Yeah. So I wouldn't call that Orthodox Christianity. This is not Orthodox. This is the Christianity that Jesus came with, basically, you're describing, right? Orthodox Christianity now is either Protestantism or Catholicism. So they believe in the Trinity, they believe in the councils, they believe in the Bible that we have with particular canon. Yeah, and so I would dismiss that Christianity. The Christianity that you just mentioned, the only thing that's missing from it is for them to believe in the Prophet Muhammad. Right?
Yeah, and that's the Christianity I come to that side.
All right, okay, so maybe Jehovah's Witness or something, right? But the point is, even a Jehovah's Witness would say Jesus is the Son of God.
No, but we were not growing with that.
Okay, so you are some splinter group from Jehovah's. But the point is this, is that, good, you came from a pure monotheism, but the only thing now, I would say to a Christian who believes in all the things that you've mentioned, yeah, to look at the Bible, and in particular Isaiah 42. Because Isaiah 42, if you look at, subhanAllah, that chapter, it's amazing. It says that there will be a man that comes in the future. And that man is a prophet. He's going to be sent to the Arabs, the people of Kedar. Listen, and he's going to be sent to the people of Kedar, and the people will rejoice. Verse 11 says, on the mountains of Selah. Now, Selah is in Medina. Selah are mountain ranges which were actually in Medina. So if you look at the Bible prophecy closely, you'll realize that, and it even describes that he will fight his enemy and triumph over his enemy. Some Christians, when you ask them, who's it talking about? And I've done this with hundreds, I'm not going to say hundreds, tens of Christians, right? They'll say it's talking about Jesus, but Jesus was not sent to the Arabs. And he was certainly not triumphant over his enemy according to their narrative. He wasn't a warrior in that way. And so this could not apply to Jesus Christ. The question is, which Arab came to the people of Medina in the mountains of Selah where the people were rejoicing and was victorious over his enemy in war? And if you just ask a historian that question with neutral language, they'll say this is a description of Prophet Muhammad in the 7th century. So this Isaiah 42, a biblical prophecy which is still intact in the books today, is something I would give to a Christian and say, look, who is this talking about? It can't be about Jesus, because Jesus was not sent to the Arabs. You see? He was not sent to the Arabs. And he did not go to Arabia, to people of Kedar. and he did not triumph over his enemy. This does not relate to him, you see? So that's what I would say. Sorry.
Sister at the back?
Yeah.
So actually, I think that, I think this is question.
Yeah.
To think about the question, so you're talking about like how these systems kind of, the Iron Cage from normal that kind of has, how we basically provide.
Sorry, can you raise your voice a little?
Sorry, so just when you were speaking, you mentioned that the Iron Cage that you were speaking of was kind of how we define our success. So
Yes.
Kind of context of the words, living here in the West is very much so by power and money, that's how we get success. So these Muslims define it as seeking knowledge.
Yes.
So how do we actually? It's one thing to believe mentally, but when you're existing within that system, you can't just say that, okay, now I'm going to seek knowledge and then get all success, because the system that you're living in says it and defines it. The way you get success is through power. So how do we both, have our mentality kind of get benefits to actually achieve success when society kind of limits? So, for example, you don't have income, you start seeking knowledge to a certain extent, you have to still exist in that system and say, hey, I need to make a living and still achieve some kind of power within this system to then, you know what I mean? Like, it's like,
Yeah. So these are good questions. Look, sometimes I present Islam and liberalism as if they're two different things completely. There are so many similarities between the two things. For example, in economic liberalism, there's free market economics. In Islam, there is free market economics. The Prophet Muhammad, he says that let the musa'ir, or the one who's basically Allah, determine the price of the goods and services in a given society. So in other words, let the invisible hand of the free market, right? But in this case, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control of that. How do we determine price of goods? And if you look in Bulugh al-Maram, the very first hadith that comes up in Kitab al-Bay'ah, which is the book of transactions, is khayrul amal. What is the khayrul amal? Al-amal al-rajul biyadihi. That a person's, what is the best of work? A man's work with his own hands. A man's work with his own. Meaning what? Self-employment. If you look at what Sana'ani says about this in Subul al-Salam, in the sharh of this hadith, he says, this is because that person, when he's working with his own hand, he is getting the money for himself and he's making tawakkul ala Allah. So in other words, self-employment, working within the system, getting money, is part of the religion of Islam. I wouldn't dismiss that. But the point is, we have to temper that reality with the fact that the Prophet Muhammad also said, Ta'isa abdu dinari dirham, that curse be to the slave of the dinar and the dirham. So for us, we have a system of economics which impacts the individual and also is a collective system. And by the way, look, I find this really fascinating, There's a man called Hayek, who was one of the biggest economists of all time. And he had a beef with another guy called John Maynard Keynes. And they both had different systems of economics. John Maynard Keynes was into, basically, he believed, I'm not going to go into details, but Hayek believed in supply side economics, free market economics. Basically, he was saying that there's, like Adam Smith, he said there's an invisible hand of the free market. These concepts are all in Islam. What these guys were very, very popular, made popular for, were actually all economic concepts which existed 1,400 years before. However, the Quran also says, حَتَّى لَا تَكُونَ دُولَةً بَيْنَ الْأَغْنِيَاءِ مِنْكُمْ. It's not a pure capitalism in Islam, and so we do believe in a system of redistribution. The Quran says, so that it does not become a circulation among the elites of you. So you should spread wealth so it doesn't become a circulation. So we have, we would say, a system, a complexity of economics, which is predicated on a free market system with redistributionary methods. It's not far, what Canada has in place, it's not far away from what Islam could allow, the only thing is, obviously the interest would not be there, which if you look at it, subhanAllah, I'm not going into an economic discussion, but boom and bust, because one of the things that no one has been able to solve is boom and bust in an economic system. Boom and bust is when you have basically an economic peak and then you have a recession. Yeah, and this is basically all free market economic systems have suffered from boom and bust. Gordon Brown, the Prime Minister of England, said, I'm going to cancel out boom and bust. That was the most ridiculous statement any politician had ever made, because it was impossible to do that in a capitalistic system. And so what we say is that capitalism, a pure capitalism, which is based on interest, which, by the way, the Prophet, and it's mentioned in this book as well, you can read, predicted would happen. He said there's going to come a time we will never be able to even move away from interest. SubhanAllah, this is deep, man. He goes, there's going to come a time, this is the signs of the day of judgment, that interest is going to be everywhere, that you're not even going to be able to circumnavigate away from it. So try and have taqwa of Allah as much as you can. You see that? The Prophet of Islam gives such clear guidance that he even makes predictions in order to give us the guidance. That's how deep it is. And from an economic perspective, I don't think justice has ever been done on the kind of complex system that we have in place, both on an individual level and on a communal level, which relate to the prosperity of man and flattening out the inequalities that exist within societies. However, and I don't want to take too long on this, but it's a big question. Islam still gave humans agency at the top level, the elites, so-called elites, to be able to give sadaqah. So, do you know, and this is going to seem like a completely unrelated thing to say, or question, yeah? Some people say, how comes Islam did not come and abolish slavery? And how does this relate to this? I'll tell you how. Some people say, how comes Islam did not come and abolish slavery? And there's no doubt that Islam has an emancipatory kind of framework. Good, thank you, yeah? Where it encourages emancipation. So, yeah? What is the good way? To free slaves is the good way. But the question is, why did Islam not come and say, just like, for example, like interest is now haram. In the same way, it didn't come and say slavery is now haram. My answer to that, which I've been thinking about, because Ash-Shatibi mentions, who is one of the major scholars of Usul al-Fiqh, he mentions there's no doubt in the fact that freeing a slave is part of the higher objective of Islam, and that to get rid of, therefore, the institution of slavery is part of the objective. But how comes it wasn't abolished? The reason why it wasn't abolished is the same reason as why poverty wasn't abolished. Think about this. Islam didn't come and say all poor people are going to be restored overnight. It put in place systems of zakat and sadaqah, which meant that over time, poor people would have sustainability. But it didn't say, think about this, it didn't say that people at the very bottom, were instantly going to be given some kind of provision that would completely give them all the needs that they need. We had Baytul Mal, we have these things, but it was conceivable within an Islamic system to have poor people. In the same way it was conceivable in the early days within the Islamic system to have slaves. But it doesn't mean that either are desirable in Islamic understanding. Does that make sense? So a lot of people, because they don't understand the economic workings of Islam, sometimes they misread and misinterpret some of the greater maqasid objects of Sharia. To answer your question directly, therefore, Islam has a very complicated and very complex and sophisticated economic system, which makes sure that people, number one, have the right attitude towards money, poverty, and impoverishment, and number two, allows them to take from the dunya what they need. And it encourages self-employment, but so long as they use the money for the right things, and hopefully that answers your question, yeah?
Excellent.
You can come and speak to me after if I have the time, inshallah.
Okay, so here's how we're going to proceed.
Yeah.
Inshallah, I'm going to go back to the brother who I promised to ask his question, if he still wants to. And then we're going to wrap up with two more anonymous questions, okay? I know that there are a few people who put their hands up, but I will give priority to some of the anonymous questions, two of them. So brother, would you like to ask your question?
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah khair for everything. So I think the biggest opposition to your arguments, which are excellent, is not really an academic opposition. It's one which is psychological and emotional. So outside of this lecture hall, I don't want to say all, but many, if not most of the students outside of this lecture hall right now are just concerned about their next biology test. They should be thinking about the existential questions that you posed, but they're not. So for me, the biggest opposition to these arguments is really apathy. It's people just not caring. And I've talked to young atheists, even at the university level, and you remind them of death and their impending non-existence. What's the purpose of life if you're just going to become dust? There's nothing more to it. And one of the answers they'll sometimes give is, well, I didn't exist before I was born or before I was conceived. My non-existence didn't bother me then. So my non-existence won't bother me in the future either. So my question is, because you have a lot of experience talking to people on the street level, how would you try to shake somebody out of that kind of apathy?
It's a good question. So it just for those who didn't hear, a lot of people don't care. They're apathetic to the question, the ultimate questions. I say to you, try your best, remind them of death. And if you don't remind them, then life will give them a punch in the face. And when some bad thing happens to them, they're going to be reminded, as the Quran says. I was coming to Canada. The plane was going down, and there was like bad movements and stuff like that. Yeah. And I don't want to assume that these guys were atheists around me, but I think that they were. And I saw in their face, sorry to say, I'm not saying that this is generalizable, but human beings as Muslims, we have the same tendencies, right? I'm not saying this is exclusive to atheists. But what I'm saying is that human beings have a tendency in scary situations to call out to God. I remember I had a friend called, I'm not going to mention his name, but I was working in the city in London. I was a land broker at one point. Actually, I was 19 years old. I was trying to make money. And I had a guy who's my manager, actually. And some bad thing happened to him in his life. He's an atheist. He used to argue with me on atheism. And he started calling out to God, and I was like, what are you doing? I was actually shocked. I was like, oh God, man. And I said, can I ask you a question? Why are you? Because it's just natural. It's natural that I call out to God in these situations. So if your reminder does not avail or comes to no avail, then life will give them a punch in the face. And believe me, everyone gets that punch in the face. Someone will die. Half of the population will get cancer. Half of the population of Canada is going to get cancer. 1 out of 2 people in this room are going to have cancer. Do you know what I'm trying to say? This is deep. No, it's not. There is a prophecy. Actually, it's a good question. It's a prophecy. There is a prophecy on sexually transmitted diseases. Right? So the prophet said there's going to come a time where you guys are going to have sex outside of marriage, and there will be new diseases that never existed before. That's happened, yeah? But in terms of cancer, look, this is serious. I was looking at some data just 2 or 3 days ago. I was shocked. Do you know what countries are most susceptible to getting cancer? The Western world. Look at a map. Look, go to the American Cancer Association. I'm not sure if that's what it's called, but it's the American main body for it. And look at the map. Write down by country, what country. You'll see a map. The countries which have more than 6% are in red. And you'll see that those countries are America, Europe, and so on. So I'm not saying that because they're disbelievers. I'm not saying that. All right, I'm saying it might be something we're eating. No. It might be something that we're eating. It might be something that we're drinking. I don't know what poison they're putting in the food. I genuinely don't know. I'm not a scientist. I wish I could be clever enough to gauge what's happening here. Someone's got to say meat.
Nope, bro. Please no interjections. Not at this point.
We'll get his input later. Yeah, let him go on. That's what they say in cancer. Look, that's what they said in cancer research. When I looked at the cancer research website, which is the UK equivalent, they said the main reason is because of life expectancy, and when life expectancy goes higher, then you have a higher chance of getting cancer. But that's not true. That's basically what I'll say. The reason why is because if you look at, for example, the UK life expectancy for a man is like 75, for a woman is 77. You can go to another part of the world where life expectancy is very similar and people don't get cancer at the same rate. The question is why? Now, I'm not saying that I'm not a scientist here giving you some answers, or definitive answers. But what I'm saying is that the reality is 1 out of 2 people in this room are going to get cancer, according to the statistics that we have. Now, the point is why? I don't know. We don't know why. But how, subhanAllah, are we going to deal with that? That's life's punch in the face. Now, imagine you're a cancer patient having gone through chemotherapy, and your hair is gone. You know, and a lot of people had to deal with that. Many people in this room, including myself, had to deal with family members with cancer, right? I'm sure at least, if I were to ask you to put your hands up, one corner of the room, I'm not going to do it because I don't want you to have traumatic experiences, would put their hand up of a family member or friend having cancer, right? But what would you feel like if you are on your deathbed with cancer and the doctor says to you, you've got 10 days to live, 20 days to live? How would you live your life? What would you do? Think about that for a second. Or if that happens to a loved one of yours. And if you're an atheist, wallahi, if I was an atheist and I was on a bed and they told me I've got 10 days to live, I'm not going to go have sex. I'm not going to smoke weed. You know, I might say my final goodbyes, but at the end of the day, that is the most depressing state of affairs you can ever think of. I'm sorry to say, that is the most depressing. There's no continuation, there's nothing, there's no meaning. You're finished. You are finished. No, that's the reality.
I'm sorry. I think that's such a serious thing. No, I mean, other people don't even know about it.
You know what I mean? Well, and that so if you don't have a framework that you can properly, depend on, then I don't think it's going to be, Allah, you don't want to be put in that position. So if your reminder doesn't avail them, then life's reminder will certainly avail them. It will definitely, the punch in the face that life gives you is more stingy than any kind of reminder you probably be able to give them.
I love how everyone understood that reference.
So I know you guys are into like junk YouTube.
And you know what, bro? Like, if non-existence doesn't threaten them, being certain of the existence of hell and of paradise certainly will. Right? Pain and pleasure are powerful motivators. Psychology proves this. So, okay. How's everyone enjoying this so far? Are you guys feeling entertained and engaged with these questions? Yeah? You want to keep going a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. I was requested to shorten this. Chip, is there a particular cutoff that you need? Is that okay? Yeah? Inshallah. Bismillah.
If you need to leave, because we are over time, feel free to leave. I know a lot of people.
See, this guy's trying to ruin my Come on, don't give him an option. Everyone's going to go.
Now you're finished, bro. Now you're finished.
I want to show you. Yeah, let's stay together, man. Let's stay together for another couple of minutes now. We'll go together.
Okay, so to be considerate towards the fact that they have a long journey ahead, I'm going to try balancing the fact that you guys are loving these questions. I'm going to ask you a few more, but at the same time, I'm going to cut it off after maybe maximum 2 anonymous questions. Okay? And please try to keep the interjections at a bare minimum. I know that people have useful comments, but we're just too late right now. If we had more time, I would have been happy to allow it. Okay, Bismillah. So the second last question I'm going to put forth is very interesting. It is, with the knowledge that only Allah knows the future, what is the purpose of testing us? If Allah already knows some of us will fail, then why test us?
All right, so the question of determinism, this is probably the most asked question, to be it's in the top 10 of most asked questions I get. If Allah already knows what I'm doing, then why is He giving us a test, and how can He push us into the hellfire? That's one of the most common questions I've ever heard from Muslims. Yeah. And my answer is this: is that yes, we believe in free will, the intuition of free will, and we believe in determinism as well. We believe in those two things at the same time. How it happens, no one knows the how. No one knows the how, and no one can disprove that it happens, because if you say, "Well, I don't know how it happened," however, therefore I'm not going to believe it. This is called the fallacy of incredulity, right? You are assuming that just because you don't know how something works, that it's not true. But just because you don't know how, the mechanism of how something works, it doesn't mean it's not true. What I want to say is this. This is something, and you've got to register this in your minds. The question of if everything is written, and at the same time, we have free will, how could that be fair, just, or so on? This question, number one, is a non-Muslim specific question. Let me explain. Atheists have the same question. Now, you'd be shocked to know that. You'll be shocked to know that. In philosophy, there are three schools of thought. There is what you call libertarianism, there is determinism, and at the middle you have compatibilism. So determinism is the idea that everything happens as a matter of necessity. So in other words, everything has to happen the way it is. No one has any free will at all. An atheist would say the reason why we believe in determinism is because everything we are doing is necessitated by previous actions and causes. So there is an uninterrupted line of causation. That uninterrupted line of causation forces everything to happen in the way that it's happening. Does that make sense so far? So atheists would argue, some atheists, determinist atheists would argue, and I'm letting you know as atheists to know that God is out of the picture in this. He's completely out of the picture. They would say, these determinist atheists would say that everything happens because of an uninterrupted line of causal events. Like me speaking in front of you now is not because of my free will, according to this understanding, determinist understanding. It's because there was a limited set of variables, environmental variables, which forced me effectively to come and speak to you in this way. I am a puppet from this perspective. I am the product of all of the events that came before me from this perspective. This is called determinism. And this is an atheistic understanding. Some atheists believe in that without believing in God. At the other end of the spectrum, you have people that say, no, we don't believe in that at all. We believe everyone has free will. And they have a good argument. They say, look, we intuit free will. We have an intuitive experience of free will. And you cannot deny that experience that I have, that if I want to hold this, I am choosing to hold this right now. That experience is almost undeniable for everyone in this room. So you have determinists on the one hand, you have libertarians on the other hand, who don't believe in determinism but believe in free will, and in the middle you have what is called compatibilists, who say there is no contradiction between determinism and free will, but the way in which they work together is unknown to us. But both are perfectly provable, because you cannot deny the intuitive experience, first-person experience of free will. You can't deny it, and you can't argue against the fact that there was an uninterrupted causal line that is causing everyone to do what they're doing. Therefore, the compatibilists would argue, non-Muslim, they would argue both of those things, although we don't know how they work together, they do. Now, this reminds you of basically the position of a Jabariya, who are people who are determinists. On the one hand, it's Islamic heretic group, and on the other hand, the Qadariya, Islamic heretic group, and in the middle you have Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, who are the compatibilists. Therefore, the question of how can God determine everything and we have free will at the same time is not a question that is exclusive for Muslims. It's a question that atheists are dealing with. So imagine if you leave Islam because of this question. Very few people will do so, but it lingers in the mind of men. And obviously women as well, for those feminists out here, you know what I'm talking about. So, you know, yeah. Why are you smiling? It lingers in the mind of men. So imagine you leave Islam and you become an atheist. So some guy takes you out of Islam and starts quizzing you. He says, look, man, how could it be just God is doing everything for you and you just end up? How can it be that God determines everything and you have free will? How does this change? An atheist convinces you one day, yeah? Say, okay, you know what, man, I could never reconcile this. I'm deciding that this God doesn't exist. You know, because, you know, I've always had that question. How could God not only have ilm, but have mashi'ah, which is, ilm is knowledge of the future. Mashi'ah is will. Kitaba, which is writing, and khalq, he creates the future, all of those things. And at the same time we have free will. How? It's a contradiction. Therefore someone leave Islam. Okay. She's an atheist philosopher friend. Okay, so now that I've left Islam, what's our position as atheists in regards to this situation? say, look, there's actually 3 schools of thought. Right? There's the compatibilist position, there's the determinist position, and then there is the libertarian position, the determinist, and the compatibilist position. So this kind of reminds me of the same discussion that we were having. The only thing is, you've replaced the term God with uninterrupted causal line. But you guys don't even believe, in the first cause. Yeah, if you have an uninterrupted causal line, where does it end? Is it infinite regress of causes, right? So maybe the guy decides to be Christian. He says, atheism doesn't work for me, and and Islam doesn't work for me. Therefore, I'm going to be a Christian. So he goes to his friend and says, look, man, I've had these issues. They're telling me this and they're telling me that. What's our position as Christians on this? He says there's actually 2 schools of thought. Arminius, John Calvin. Research this. John Calvin basically is the Jabari who says that we don't have, you're a puppet. God chooses and so on. And Arminius is the other one. And then, you see, he tries to be a compatibilist of some sort. This, therefore, is not a Muslim-specific question. This question, we have to be educated on this, is a question that everyone is asking. Everyone is asking it. But the fact that we don't have the answer to the mystery of how we have intuitive free will, as well as there being an uninterrupted causal line, but both are perfectly provable. Both are perfectly provable. They're both actually undeniable, I would say. They're undeniable. You can't say that we don't have free will, that I'm operating on free will. At the same time, you cannot disprove the fact that there's an uninterrupted causal line. So there has to be a compatibilist position. How it works is what everyone wants to know, and no one can know. I'll tell you this from now, that how here, no one has cracked. And no one can crack. Have you cracked it? Yes, sorry.
I was actually asking the same question 2 days ago.
Yes.
And the idea that I've reached is that there's 3 kinds of things that happen to you. There's one thing that there's things that happen to you. There's things that you do but you can't control, and there's things that you can at this moment say yes, I can do this, or I can not do this. And the first 2 we argue that those are determinants. That's what you follow. And the other ones where in the same moment right now I can actually choose either. God actually judges you on those things. God doesn't judge you on the other ones.
Yeah.
And that in itself, in my opinion, proves that God actually lets the choice to you. And for God to be actually fair, He actually has to not have the term. Like a final example of that is how can God know that you're going to end up in Jahannam? That's predetermined by what you're saying right now. How's that fair?
Yeah. Okay. So let me give you another way of thinking about this. There's a beautiful poetry. وَمِنْ عَجَائِبِ الجَّبَّارِ أَنْ يَجْبُرُ الْعِبَادِ بِالِاخْتِيَارِ. That from the wonders of the compeller that he compels the servants into free choice. Think about this for a second. If I make the statement that the all-powerful one forces you to have free will, wait a minute. This is interesting now, yeah? Can you disprove this statement? Listen to what I'm saying. The all-powerful one forces you to have free will. That is an unfalsifiable statement. You can never disprove that statement. Do what you want. Bang your head against the wall 1,000,000 times. You will never, if I said to you, listen carefully, that the most powerful one forces you to have free will. ومن عجائب الجبار أن يجبر العباد بالاختيار. Yeah? From the wonders of the compeller, that he compels the slaves into free will. Now, if I say, is God, listen to this carefully, is the all-powerful one capable of compelling the slaves into free will? If you say no, you have to give me the reason why. Because the only thing God, we could say, is impossible for God to do are those things which negate his godhood. So for example, if we say, can God become a man? We say, if God becomes a man, then is no longer God anymore. But God, by his definition, can never become a man. It's impossible. Because he's necessarily eternal, independent, and necessary. Therefore, God becoming a man is impossible. This is called a sifat al-dhatiyya. Anything which contradicts the sifat dhatiyya, which are the intrinsic attributes of God, are impossible. Anything that contradicts those things about God which never change is impossible. However, those things which are outside of that, God is capable of doing. Therefore, if I make the statement, the logical statement, that the all-powerful one compels us to free will, then in that statement is the presupposition that free will can exist side by side with determinism. And this presupposition is not contradictory based on the fact that both are provable. Both free will is intrinsically provable and determinism is demonstratively possible. So from that perspective, there's no issue. But how it happens, the mechanisms of it, no one knows. Yes?
I saw a video a while back where there's this machine that measures your brain.
Before you continue, this is the final interjection I'm gonna allow, okay?
Okay.
Cool.
Objection, okay.
Come and fight me, bro.
So there's a video on YouTube where you have this machine which can measure your brainwave, and it knows before you even press a button which button you're gonna press. Like you consciously don't have no clue what you're gonna press, but it knows that you're gonna press something. So what I'm trying to ask is, well, I wanted to ask this before her, but like, is there free will? Like obviously you said there's no answer to it. But what are your thoughts on that? Like a machine knows before you do that you're gonna do something. That's kind of messed up.
Yeah, a machine can never have free will.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a machine, it's impossible for a machine to feel as if they have free will, like, because it's an intuitively experienced thing, first person, yeah? I experienced that about myself. But the thing is, the determinist view of the world is that we're actually all machines. Do you get it? But that denies our experience of free will. That's why Ahl Sunnah's position, or the position of the Sunni people in Islam, is a compatibilist one that reconciles between the qadr, which is the predestination or determinism, and khiyar, which is free will. Both can exist at the same time. This is the point. How? Philosophers haven't cracked that yet. We have theologians. And they probably won't be able to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to ask one final question that will, I believe, inshallah, be the most beneficial. I thought about this for a while because there are so many questions here. There's like a bunch about feminism. And there are others related to increasing knowledge, such as Arabic. There are other questions related to the nature of choice and predestination. However, the one question I believe is most useful is related to method. So someone here asked, what should lay Muslims do when they are encountered by different doubts? What should their plan of attack be? The reason why I chose this question is because if you have the answer to this question, all other follow-up questions, you will have a method to actually deal with.
Okay, so the thing is this, I think you touched upon it when you were talking about knowing God. فَاعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. Know that there is no God worthy of worship except for Allah. So the first thing is that if you have a firm understanding, because the thing is this, is like a tree has a root. Every tree has a root. You can't build castles on thin air. So your foundations have to be very solid. And the foundations come from the Quran and the Sunnah. To actually understand, خَيْرُكُمْ مَنْ تَعَلَّمَ الْقُرْآنَ وَعَلَّمَ. As we said, learn and teach the Quran. The best of you are those who learn and teach them. So have a foundational understanding of the Quranic discourse, especially in relation to God's attributes, names and attributes. This is the most important thing. Because when someone asks a dumb question, then you can completely unpack it. I was watching Richard Dawkins the other day. I was thinking, this 78-year-old man is really asking dumb questions. Wallahi, I was shocked that this guy actually wrote a book and he's got traction and so on and so forth. Because he was asking, well, who designed the designer? I was thinking, this is such an elementary question. Any logician will be able to unpack this question and humiliate this guy. If someone asks you who created God, which is a very common question, how are you going to answer that? Well, because oh, subhanAllah, that's right. So yeah, God, he must have a creator as well, and so on. You know, the question itself is contradictory because the question is, who created the uncreated? That's what the question is saying. The question is saying, who created the uncreated one? And so when you are able to unpack the presuppositions of the question. So number one is you should know your religion and especially knowledge of God. Number two is for you to be able to unpack the assumptions of the questions being asked. Don't always ask a question, answer a question, just for the sake of it. Someone asks you, why are you wearing hijab? For example, yeah? Someone could ask that question, why are you wearing it? So you don't have to answer that question because the presupposition is that that is an aberration from normativity or normality. So what are you talking about? Why are you wearing what you're wearing? So someone said, why you got a beard? I said, why are you shaving your face? Isn't it natural? It's actually, you're the one doing something to yourself. I'm the one just leaving what I've got. I'm the natural one. You're the, do you get it? So you're the one being active about taking the facial hair off your face. I'm being passive and leaving it on my face. So why should I have to answer your question of why I'm not saying do that with your friends and colleagues. Because you end up, it's true, you can damage relationships like that. Because sometimes, I'll be honest with you, just from experience? Yes, I am. I have to. Sometimes it's ultra rationalist. I'm not going to say with who, my family, but maybe you can take a guess. You have a little argument, and then the person says something and say, look, the presupposition of what you just asked, you've actually made 10 assumptions in this. You've committed a fallacy in your reasoning. Oh, you just don't understand how I feel. So you've got to track emotional, because it becomes like, when you think too, I think too mechanically nowadays, this thing with debating people, you think it destroys relationships. Honestly, don't do that. I have to put that as a caveat here, yeah? But at the same time, you have to think like that in that rationalistic format when the time is right. So if someone's asking you questions which are loaded, these are loaded questions. I saw you were in Canada. I saw Jordan Peterson. You guys know who he is, yeah? He's this guy's sly. He's sly, wallah, he's sly. Asked about Islam. What do you think about Islam? He goes, well, I don't know much about Islam, but I can't do a Canadian accent. What was that, bro? Listen, you guys just have a fake American accent. I don't know how to. What? It's true. What? It's true.
Wait, did you meet your music?
Say again?
Did you meet him?
No. I just watched him on YouTube.
I see.
And I saw him, what he said was this, he goes, well, Prophet Muhammad, he goes, Muhammad was a warlord. Wait a minute. Why are you using loaded language? Just be neutral. He was a military commander, and he was very successful in his expeditions. I mean, is that what you're trying to communicate? He was a warlord? So Moses was a warlord? Now hold on, and then he said, but Jesus on the other hand. Come on, bro. Jesus is meant to be your God, right? He was the one that was commanding, this and that in the Bible. Because he's your God, he's part of the Trinity, right? So all those Old Testament commands that say go into this village and destroy everyone, Numbers 31:18 and so on, that's Jesus talking. When he comes back in the Revelations and he kills this person, Jezebel, the prostitute and this and that, and kills the children. You didn't read that? I don't think this guy spends time reading about Muhammad's warlord and what? Jesus is the pacifist. Your idea of Jesus is a loser, sorry to say. Someone who lost. It's a tragedy. Who failed. Our idea of Jesus is someone who Allah rescued. That's how it is. Your God died, your God lost, and so on. So I could say that. Isn't this a loaded language? I can use loaded language as well, Jordan, please. Do you get what I'm trying to say? So your God's a loser, sorry to say. He lost, he died. Your understanding of God is that he lost and he died. But I wouldn't go there. You know why? Because let's be neutral. The conception of Christianity is that there was a crucifixion and that symbolizes, the expiation of sin for the rest of humankind, and that's the salvific narrative. That's neutral language. Not saying he lost and he's a loser and so on. I can say that. But he says, I don't know. So this is what they do. I don't know, but then you've just said some things that you do know. What are you talking about, man? Calm down. Use neutral language. Seriously, use neutral language. So the point is this, is that when people use loaded language, you've got to be able to identify the presuppositions. Whenever they ask you questions, you have to identify the assumptions. This is my methodology. Number one, is the question even valid? How many days of the week, yes or no? What do you mean, how many days? What are you talking about? Would you answer such question? Would you answer? No way. Say, what do you mean yes or no? Monday, Tuesday, what day is it? Yes or no? So are you okay? Am I speaking foreign tongue? Right? So what you got to do is you got to identify the presuppositions, the assumptions. Number one, you have to know your Lord. Number two, and number three, identify loaded language. Because people use language manipulatively, like Jordan Peterson, pretending to be this passive guy who don't know nothing. By the end of the day, you're spraying out all these language. You're using all this loaded language and putting these labels on historical figures that you don't know anything about. You haven't read on. So the point is, identify that quickly and challenge. Always, basically, in one word, you got to question the question. And the questioner as well. Don't make you put you on the back foot, unless it's a legitimate question, which is important for the progression of that conversation. So these are usually like rules of thumb that I would employ, inshallah. Is there any other final questions? Or?
I think that sums it up very nicely. You got to question the question, and you got to think clearly, and then you got to control the frame. 3 brilliant rules. Put your hands up if you guys and gals genuinely enjoyed this event, please. I did. MashaAllah. Alhamdulillah. Do you guys think you learned something new? Put your hands up if you did. Awesome. MashaAllah. I wanna extend my sincere thanks to Sheikh and to Brother Mohammed. We really appreciate your presence and your time. And I hope that everyone here understands that, this is not just for entertainment. This is not just for, us to have our doubts dealt with for a day. These are the tools and the building blocks that if you hold on to these and you build on them, inshallah, for the rest of your lives, you can have a wonderful relationship with Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and be a catalyst to guide other people. We're in bad times. We're in really bad times. I empathize with a lot of these questions because people are disconnected from our scholarship. If you connect back to it, you'll find answers. You will find answers, inshallah. On behalf of the University of Waterloo MSA, I'd like to present you a gift, inshallah.
We need a jiu-jitsu match now.
Do you want to do a box unpacking?
You want to punch you back?
I'm going to give the mic to Sheikh for a minute. He has a brief announcement to make, inshallah.
And thank you everyone for your patience and forbearance. The easiest way I explain Qadr to my kids is that I know before, I have 4 kids, alhamdulillah, 2 boys and 2 girls. And I know even before the time I got married and I had kids, if the day came and I go to the store and I buy chocolate and broccoli and I take this to my kids, I know what they're going to choose. Even from before I got married, from before I had kids, right? So think of it this way. I'll conclude with a story, inshallah. They say it's a true story that happened in Toronto. Very quick, inshallah. So basically, 1 month before Eid al-Adha, or Bani Eid, a family in Toronto, a Muslim family, they bought a kharoof. You know what a kharoof means? Yes, tell me.
Go.
Who said sheep? Yes.
And you.
because I'm a translator by profession. So kharuf is a sheep or lamb, more or less. Goat is a little bit, they're cousins, right? So basically they bought the kharuf and they were living in an apartment building in the 12th floor. So basically they got the kharuf, they fed the kharuf, they kept him in the toy room, and they were feeding him. They reserved a seat for him on the table. Every day they gave him a bubble bath, they gave him ice cream and stuff from Tim Hortons. They treated him like a royalty for a whole month. And they gave him a name, Zizu and everything. Until the day of Eid came, they went to the masjid and they prayed Salatul Eid, and they came back and they stood in the balcony with the kharuf, the sheep. And they were looking at the neighbors as they took their kharufs, sheep for sacrifice, and they noticed the sad look on the face of the kharuf. And they said, SubhanAllah, they stopped with the kharuf, right? And they said, okay, why are you sad? And he said, I'm sad because everyone got a kharuf to sacrifice today except us. Think about it. It will give you a little insight into the purpose of life. Sometimes we forget who we are. Right? Yeah, I've been listening to British English the whole day. Can I get some water? Okay, Jazakallah. So now, as I mentioned at the beginning, Ayura is doing a tour in Canada, Halifax, the GTA, Calgary, and Vancouver. And Alhamdulillah, so basically we reach out to masajids and schools and we provide training. If in the future, inshallah, you guys decide that you need the da'wah training here, we can come one weekend, 2 days, inshallah, to give you the training. If you need more talks, the MSA can communicate with us, inshallah ta'ala. So basically, what else? Yes, hijab, inshallah, he's talking tomorrow in Guelph, 7 to 9 p.m. at the University of Guelph, inshallah ta'ala. Provide free da'wah materials, free training, everything is free. To find out more about the tour, inshallah ta'ala, go to our website, ayira.ca, or you can go to ayira.org/Canada. Jazakallah khairan for coming today. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us beneficial knowledge. And this is an amazing audience. I have to give you one last story. Okay. So I'll make a small commercial here. This is my I've been listening to you for 3 hours. This is my translation of the Quran. My name is Imam Mustafa Khattab. This is the first translation of the Quran ever completed and published in the history of Canada. Very simple, accessible, and easy. Inshallah, you can get it for free. You can download the app actually. Go to your app store and look for theclearquran.com, inshallah ta'ala. So basically, this is a story of what was the story again? Yeah, so basically the story that I always mention about getting involved in da'wah and delivering the message of Islam with compassion and wisdom. I met a brother many years back, and I asked him, how did you come to Islam? Because I'm always interested in people's Islamic story. How did he come to Islam? And he said he accepted Islam through an amazing Muslim drug dealer. Dude, well, I know marijuana is legal, but what happened? And he said, he was dealing with many people to buy his drugs, his weed and stuff. And he said he came to know about Islam through this guy. The drug dealer was not actually practicing. He said because this guy was always honest when he sold me drugs. He didn't cheat me like other guys. And he said, I'm not the only one who accepted Islam through this guy. And I always say, if this non-practicing zombie dude who was selling drugs had this impact on people and he brought them closer to Islam, you can imagine if you're a practicing Muslim, you know what Islam is all about, how much impact you can have. So I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us beneficial knowledge and to use us for the benefit of humanity. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us to what is best for Islam, Muslims, and humanity at large. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide people to the Sirat al-Mustaqim. Keep us on the Sirat al-Mustaqim. We make dua for Canada that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will continue to bless, protect this country and make it prosperous and successful. Ameen, ameen, ya Rabbil Alameen. وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. جزاك الله خير. السلام عليكم.
Yeah.